This is the video about plagiarism prepared for CDFS 412. I am your narrator, Dr. Kristen Moilanen. By now, you should have completed the WVU Library's plagiarism tutorial and should have submitted evidence that you earned 100% on the quiz. I found that the tutorial provides a nice overview of plagiarism, but that some students have trouble applying what they've learned through the tutorial in their assignments. This short presentation is designed to help fill this gap in an attempt to have a 0% plagiarism rate in the course this semester. Taking plagiarism seriously is an important part of your instructor's role, and it is one way that your instructor strives to maintain the integrity of WVU and to protect the value of its degrees, while helping each student reach their maximum potential. I'm spending about half a class period or making the short video on plagiarism because of increasing incidences over the past few semesters. In previous sections of the class, I've had rates range between about 5% of students on up to about 40% of my students. Now, although most students seem to have gained knowledge about what's acceptable and what's not in some way, a significant portion haven't. When I've had to meet with students about plagiarism, all or nearly all of the students penalized indicated that they didn't know an action constituted plagiarism, or they didn't understand how to avoid plagiarism. So consequently, there's a need to clear up any remaining ambiguity regarding plagiarism, because what you don't know can hurt you. So just so everyone's clear, all aspects of the paper must be your own work and in your own words. This also applies to your homework assignments. Plagiarism will not be tolerated, and it will be dealt with according to the procedures outlined in the WVU Student Code of Conduct, which is linked from the syllabus. As your instructor, I would much rather see you try your best and mess up the study details when writing your paper, or have imperfect writing, much more than I would rather you have perfect writing copied directly from the articles, because that is plagiarism. So students don't usually intend to plagiarize, but this doesn't change the seriousness of the offense or the penalties at all. It's just like if you miss a sign on the highway indicating a change in the speed limit. If you're pulled over by the police for speeding, you're still responsible, you'll still get a ticket, whether you saw the sign or not. The penalties are severe, regardless of intent, regardless of the seriousness of the offense. Once I detect plagiarism in a paper, I have an ethical obligation to apply appropriate penalties and to report all instances of plagiarism to OSJA, the Office of Student Judicial Affairs. It's not a choice, it's not a matter of professional judgment. Failing to report plagiarism undermines my professional integrity. All instances of plagiarism will result in 1, a mandatory grade reduction on the assignment or paper. Depending on the degree of plagiarism, this can range from a significant point deduction, think somewhere in the range of 20%, or a 0 on the assignment, or even in the course. Again, depending on the nature of the offense. 2, all instances are reported to the Office of Student Judicial Affairs, OSJA. If this is the student's first offense, the report goes into a confidential file. The offense is not mentioned anywhere on transcripts or on student records. They don't send a letter home to your parents, nothing like that. It just stays between you and OSJA. 3, if this is a second or repeat offense, OSJA can apply more serious penalties independent of those assigned by the course instructor. These penalties are outlined in the Student Code of Conduct. Again, the link is provided in the syllabus. Instructors don't find out if it's a second or repeat offense. That information is not shared by OSJA with the instructor. So again, that's kept between you and the Office of Student Judicial Affairs. Penalties and reporting to OSJA are non-negotiable. The same set of standards is and will be consistently followed for all students in order to ensure that all students are treated fairly and equally. So this section of this video picks up where the tutorial and quiz leave off. filling in some of the gaps in that presentation, clearing up some common student misconceptions about paraphrasing and plagiarism, and providing you with more strategies to help you avoid problems with plagiarism altogether. So first, let's distinguish between summarizing, paraphrasing, and quoting, since this is an area that students often find confusing. For the book or movie paper, the expectation is that you will summarize each of your 3 articles. When you summarize an article or other source, you present the gist of the information conveyed in that source in your own words, and you identify that source. This is always the best option. If you summarize, you unquestionably demonstrate that you understand the material. We'll go over some more detailed suggestions on how to summarize later in this video. Note that you are already required to identify each source article as part of the paper assignment. So if you do this, you're already halfway there. When you paraphrase, you rephrase someone else's words completely into your own words, and you cite the original source. Paraphrasing is the second best option, but it can be tricky to do successfully, and it doesn't convey your understanding of the material as clearly as when you summarize. When you quote, you include statements that are exactly the same as the original passage. In order to not be plagiarism, these statements must be enclosed in quotation marks and be cited. Quoting should be your last choice, because quoting is even trickier to do effectively than paraphrasing. I found that there are 3 common misconceptions about what constitutes appropriate paraphrasing. I'll go through each of these in turn. First, it is still plagiarism if you keep the overall structure and language of a phrase, sentence, paragraph, or any other section of text, particularly if you use a thesaurus to change some keywords in that passage. Second, it's still plagiarism if you keep the overall structure and language the same, but rearrange the order of phrases or words. Third, it's still plagiarism if you keep the overall structure and language of the passage the same, but just add a citation at the end. And fourth, it's still plagiarism even if you use a combination of these 3 strategies all at once. It doesn't matter if other professors have overlooked it or if you've been able to do this in the past without difficulty. These are the generally accepted standards for plagiarism in the US. It takes time and effort to summarize effectively and to paraphrase appropriately. Now, other common pitfalls can also interfere and make it harder for students to write their best papers. These 4 potential pitfalls are listed here. I'll describe each in turn later in the video. When I meet with students in person, I often pick up on pitfall number 1, which is not understanding or feeling intimidated by the source material they're trying to summarize. Oftentimes, students won't state this directly. Students want their writing to sound as good as the writing in their articles, even though professors and instructors have no expectation that student writing will sound like this. A second problem that is sometimes mentioned is that students don't really know how to summarize or paraphrase effectively, or even what this really means. I tried to address this a little bit ago in this video, but I'll also cover some strategies to avoid this later in this video. An extremely common problem is the third, which is doing the paper under pressure. So writing in a hurry, writing late at night, putting things off until a few hours before the deadline, and so forth. When faced with these pressures, it's much easier to become complacent and to end up plagiarizing without even realizing what's happening. One goal of the library's plagiarism tutorial and quiz, as well as this entire video, is to reduce the risk of pitfall number 4, which is confusion about plagiarism, citations, direct quotes, etc. Know that avoiding these pitfalls can also help with paper performance, not just plagiarism prevention. In other words, working to avoid these traps can also help you learn through the paper and earn a better grade on the full assignment. So let's talk some more about pitfall number 1, not understanding or feeling intimidated by the source material. Now, anything new can be scary and intimidating. Many of you don't have much, really, if any, experience reading research articles, and that's okay. The only way to gain comfort and to learn how to read articles is by actually reading them and asking questions. It's kind of like learning how to read a bike or learning how to ride a bike. You can't really learn except through doing it and practicing. Now, it's a little different because research articles can be difficult to understand. And as your instructor, I don't expect you to understand every single last detail of your 3 studies. Focus on the gist and ask questions about the pieces you don't understand. It's okay, this is how you learn, and all questions are good questions. I also recommend that you take notes while you read each of your research studies, as it's really hard to keep all the details in mind when you're reading. Honestly, I do this all the time when I read journal articles. They're complicated, and taking notes just makes it easier to keep everything straight. Now, highlighting is not a substitute for taking notes. I strongly discourage highlighting. It can often lead to trouble during writing. If you're working from a highlighted article while you're writing your paper, it makes it too easy to start just copying over somebody else's words without even noticing. Now, let me reiterate. If you don't understand something in these articles that seems important, please ask about it. It's why your instructor's here. We're happy to give you an answer. We're happy to help you with the assignment. If you ask us something and we think a detail is not important, we'll tell you not to worry about it. And if it is important, we'll explain it. Now, either way, it's a win-win, and you'll learn a little bit more about research along the way. Furthermore, asking me questions about things you don't understand makes you look smart, and it shows me that you care about the quality of your work and about your education. It also helps me plan this class for the future and to learn how to teach the material. In other words, it helps me anticipate other students' questions for the future. These are all good reasons why it's important to start early. If you try to do the full paper the night before it's due, you won't have a chance to ask for help if you need it. Now, continuing, students often feel intimidated by the writing of research articles. If this is true for you, remember, I don't expect you to be able to explain the material as elegantly as the article author. Writing is absolutely a skill learned through practice, and the authors of published research articles often have decades of experience. So it's always best when students convey their understanding of the source material in their own words, even if they fall short in terms of style. Again, this is how you demonstrate what you've learned. Now remember also that writing, style, and formatting are only worth 10% of the full paper grade. And this is an area where I usually grade fairly generously. The penalty for plagiarism is typically much higher, and there's no wiggle room for generosity. So the gamble really just isn't worth the risk. Turning now to pitfall number 2, not knowing how to summarize or paraphrase effectively. This is much more likely to happen when students work directly from an article when writing a paper. It's very easy for this to happen in this situation, but particularly so if they've highlighted the article. Instead, separate out the reading process from the writing process. Read the article, take notes as you read it, one section at a time, and then make sure that you phrase your notes entirely in your own words. Again, take notes in chunks. Read one part of the paper, set it aside, make notes from memory, and then go back and make sure that you captured the key points. Also, make sure that the structure of your notes doesn't closely correspond with the structure of the passage. Once you've finished with an article, review your notes to make sure you understand all your points, and then review the full article to make sure you haven't missed anything important. Now, if you include somebody else's words or phrasing in your notes, mark it clearly. For example, use a Q for quote, with the source and page number and portion clearly marked in your notes. And then when it comes time to write your paper, use your notes as you construct each article summary, instead of working directly from the articles. This third pitfall is a very important one. You have to allow yourself enough time to complete the assignment without being in a rush. It's a myth that people do their best work while they're working under pressure. Students do much better if they start early and if they plan ahead. Plan ahead in particular for technical glitches and problems, Absolutely keep a backup copy of your paper draft on Google Documents, Dropbox, or similar website. And again, if you start early, you'll have time to get help if you need it. I also recommend that you estimate how much time you think you'll need to complete the assignment and then double that amount of time just to make sure you have enough allowed for emergencies. Without fail, writing assignments always take longer than you think they will take when you first get started. At the undergraduate level, most of us can only write one good page per hour. So if this is a 5 to 6 page paper, allow yourself at least 5 to 6 hours, but double that time just to be on the safe side. I also recommend that you don't try to do the entire assignment in one stretch. So don't try to pull a 6 to 12 hour marathon to write the full paper. Break the assignment down into chunks and do one piece at a time over a span of several days. I recommend that you block out time in your schedule to complete each piece and allow extra time just in case before the deadline. This is how I write my papers as a researcher, and it tends to work pretty well. If worst comes to worst, and sometimes it does, again, it's better to take a small penalty for late paper submission than risk an F on the assignment. Remember, it's a penalty of 5% per day, which is, again, far less than the penalty would be for plagiarism. The fourth potential pitfall. Students often have questions or are uncertain about whether they need a citation. My rule is always, if you think you need one, it's always safer to put it in instead of being sorry. You always need one whenever you use a direct quote, whether it's a short phrase or a full sentence. You must include the page number in citations for direct quotes. The page number shows where that quote can be located in the source. You also always need one anytime you paraphrase someone else's idea that is not your own. More information and guidance is provided with examples in the YouTube video by following this link on the screen. Finally, students often come to me asking if they need to cite every word that's not truly their own. Now, everyone has a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to using the standard terminology in our field. So terms or words that name concepts are not owned by anyone in particular, and these do not need to be cited. For example, these include concepts like internalizing problems, teen pregnancy, positive youth development, puberty, etc. So if you're using a name for a concept that cannot be paraphrased without changing its meaning, don't worry about it. It's okay to use these terms, these names, without fear about accidental plagiarism. To illustrate, take a peek in your textbook and look for the bolded key terms that the author includes in all chapters. Notice that the author names and defines the terms in their own words, and they don't usually include a citation for them. So you can follow the author's lead in this respect. They rarely enclose the labels for terms and quotation marks, and they rarely follow them with citations, so you don't need to either. The standards for textbook writers, researchers, and students in this way truly are the same. This video might have answered all of your questions, or it might not have, and that's okay. The good news is you'll have plenty of opportunities for practice throughout the semester, because as you might have already noticed, almost all of your written assignments are uploaded through Turnitin. You should be able to view the commonality reports on most, if not all, of these assignments. Please do so, and come to your instructor with any questions you have about these. Students often ask, what is the commonality % cutoff that's a problem? And I rarely have a good answer for them. Of course, lower is better, but as your instructors, we don't have a set cutoff in mind because the way reports are scored and Turnitin is not perfect. For example, the percentage can be elevated if students retype assignment questions, but it also can be elevated when they include references in the document. So instead, we ignore the % for the most part and just look for patterns in the text, particularly for chunks of text that might be problematic. So please take advantage of these opportunities for practice. If you still have questions or need guidance, please see or contact your instructor during their office hours or by appointment. Of course, you can always email your questions, but this works best if you can also send us some text you've written and the source article so that we can look at your particular example closely. Here are the links from earlier in the video, again for your reference. And this is the end of this presentation.